What's your most embarrassing doctor's office story?
So, yesterday I went to the doctor for some intestinal bleeding. My doctor is fairly new to the office, and I've only met her once before this. I'm only 21, so I've never had a reason for a doctor to go knuckle deep in my rectum before, but the doctor insisted that it needed to be done for some tests. So I bend over the table and she lubes up and digs for treasure. I hadn't dropped one out in a day or so because it hurts when I do so I was a bit stopped up. Upon starting to pull out, I immediately realized what's about to happen and try everything in my power to stop it. Too late. Doctor pulls her finger out and plop, out lands a turd right on the floor. I was able to hold back the rest, but the damage was done. In conclusion, dropped a steaming hot log right on the floor of my doctor's office.
Mine's not so much embarrassing as it is awesome. I had the mumps during my first year of college, and along with that I got orchitis, the swelling of the testicles caused by the mumps, in my left nut, which swelled up to the size of a potato. It was really painful and heavy, so I had to carry it everywhere for a while. So I went to the doctor's. He checked my mumps, and then I told him there was another problem. I dropped trow, lay on the doctor bed thing, and he came over to examine. He laughed when he saw it, because it was frickin' huge, and he said, "What seems to be the problem?" jokingly. At that moment, I pointed to my regular-size bollock and said, "This one shrank." Cue the 5-minute laughter from the doc. When I turned 30, I suddenly became a hypochondriac. I thought that everything was cancer or worse. So I'm seeing my doctor, who is a racquetball buddy, for my annual physical, and I mentioned that I was having some pains in the left side of my chest. I asked him, "I know this is rare, but could it be breast cancer?" I'm male, by the way. He felt around seriously, and then, with an absolutely straight face, he asked me, "Does the pain hurt worse when you're on your time of the month?" That was pretty much the end of my year of hypochondria.
I had to go to the specialist urologist due to a pain in my ding-dong. My wife, who's awesome, accompanied me for support. The doc was at a teaching hospital, so he asked her if a couple of med students could observe the exam. I say, okay. My dignity was already at a new low anyway, so why not? I drop trow and the doc starts yanking and a-pullin' on mini-me. He takes some notes and then directs the two med students to cop a feel right where he did. I happen to look over at my wife, who's trying to stifle a smile while watching three dudes essentially whack me off. In conclusion, my insurance paid for the most awkward hand action in the history of time, while my wife watched.
Well, whatever floats your wife's boat, I guess. Nothing like a mass audience for an inspection of one's manhood. On to the next story. This actually occurred shortly after I was born, and we refer to it as the green pea incident. My brother, 2 years old, was moving to solid foods and absolutely loved peas. Mushed, boiled, fried, or in things, he loved them. One day, my mum noticed that my brother wasn't going to the washroom. No big deal, she thought, it's been a day. 2 days later, nothing's coming out. He kept eating and eating like the happy little fat toddler that he was, eating all amounts of peas. My parents scheduled a day off work and took him to the doctor together. The doctor, of course, says that he must be constipated. It happens to the best of us. At this point, it's been 4 days since the little brat has taken one. The doctor gives him a large dose of prescription-strength X-Lax and suggests that they should probably keep an eye on him for the next while. As he's talking to my parents about what they should do, my brother starts to relieve himself. Bright, neon green crap. He had eaten so many peas that the fiber had actually clogged him up, and now it was returning in force. The semi-liquidated crap started flying out faster and faster, like you see in those comedy movies. Eventually, it settled down to a light stream, but not before his crap mist had covered the entire wall next to the examination table. Neon green crap mist. All over the doctor's tools, his blood pressure stuff, and his posters. It ruined the cushions on the table, and stank to high heck. My parents never went back to that doctor again. In conclusion, neon green crap mist.
I think after such a performance, you'd be obligated to give that doctor your business for the rest of your life.
A friend of mine mistakenly called her gynecologist instead of her dentist to make an appointment, and started the call by admitting she was overdue for a cleaning. Ew. When I was brought up from being under anesthesia after getting my wisdom teeth out and before my transportation back home arrived, I recovered enough to unplug my IV and various sensor doodads, and wandered into the waiting room asking for some oral action. The nurse promptly gathered me back into my room, and I recall complaining that someone might have said yes, and I deserve the right to know.
I remember my girlfriend and doctor laughing at me in the recovery room. I thought I was being completely logical, and I still don't know what I was saying. This story makes me not want to know.
My father was getting his prostate checked out by this pretty good-looking female urologist. She had to insert a catheter since my dad was having trouble peeing. Anyway, she removed the catheter once they're done, and my dad starts peeing all over the doctor's leg. She took it like a champ and told him, "If I don't get peed on at least once a day, my husband will suspect I'm ditching work to have an affair." I can't imagine her actually having an affair.
"Quickly now, pee on my leg. He won't suspect a thing." When I was newly pregnant with my daughter, I was at my OB's office for a pelvic exam. After I stirrup up, my doc is knuckle deep in me and says, "Oh, you'll be fine if you have a big baby. There's plenty of room in here." I'm sure she meant that I have a wide pelvic arch and would have no trouble with a normal, natural delivery, but what I heard was, "Wow, I see dozens of these every day, but you have a huge, gaping hoo-ha." Last time I went to the OB or gyn, the doctor, female, just shoved her fingers in me without any warning so she could check my ovaries. I'm used to having doctors that do my exams at least warn me a little before they just cram stuff up in there. But nope, not her. After that wonderful incident, she pulls off her gloves and goes, "Wow, you're extremely tight. If you ever have a child, I would never suggest you give birth that way." Didn't even understand that she'd alarmed me in my hoo-ha, so how the heck was it supposed to be relaxed in any way? I'm definitely finding a new OB-GYN this year. One day, I was visiting a new doctor and he asked me to remove my trousers. I obliged, knowing that he'd probably check me for a hernia and make sure I didn't have a third ball or something. I'd forgotten that the night before, I'd shaved off exactly 1/2 of my hair down there. As my brain started to panic and he begins fiddling around, the doctor looks up at me and says, "It's easy to start, but it's hard to finish, isn't it?" While cauterizing the hole during my vasectomy, my skin smoked more than it should have, set off the fire alarm, and I ended up with numerous people of numerous career choices in the room with my exposed nutsack. You should have said your wang was the new pope. Oh, I figured that was implied. Oh gosh, I wonder if you wanted to undo your vasectomy after that, whether you'd actually be able to. That sounds serious, yikes. When my wife was in the final stages of labor, it seemed to be taking forever. I slipped out of the birthing suite to get some fresh air and make a couple of phone calls. They made me turn off my cell inside. A nurse came running and said to me, "Quick, come back, it's all happening." And they rushed me into a room where I was confronted with a huge hairy hoo-ha, from which a beautifully bushy, dark-haired Mexican baby literally fired out of the birth canal like a rocket. I'm going, "What the frick?" when the doctor hands me scissors to cut the umbilical cord. Well, that was fun, I thought, as I discreetly slipped out of the room and into the next room where my wife was still hours away from producing. Doctors and balls, man. Back in college, I was showering one evening and noticed a lump on one of my testes, which wasn't there before. I immediately assumed the worst, as you probably should with a lump suddenly appearing on your body, and made an appearance with the school clinic the next day. I'd already said my goodbyes to the little guy, and I was ready to have him removed. "Sorry, dude, if you're a life-threatening illness, you're destroying this body and you have to go. Good luck, long live and prosper, etc." Now I'm older, and I wouldn't really give a frick if I went full mast during an exam. I'd be all like, "Hey, yeah, still got it, hey? Hey?" Being an unrepentant pervert in situations like that is one of the great parts of getting older, but that's not part of this story. Anyway, I didn't really want to get hard or generally go showing my wang to strangers, but I also didn't want to die. First doctor to examine me looked exactly like the doctor on Battlestar Galactica, old, grizzled, and handles way too many nuts to care about mine. "Why don't they turn up the gosh darn temperature?" he tells me as he grapples with a man purse as hard and shriveled as a walnut. I swear to God, he had me in one hand and was bracing himself against the exam table with his knee as he pulled. "I'm going to breathe on it if it doesn't loosen up soon," he told me. Mercifully, it released its iron grip on my balls just long enough to avoid the hot breath of an old man on my junk. Yep, that's a lump. Go get an ultrasound. Needless to say, okay, maybe not on the internet, no half-masts were popped during that day. So I went to get the ultrasound. I sat around in a waiting room full of expecting women, all looking at me like, "Why are you here?" Finally, the doctor, a 4-foot woman who was the spitting image of my best friend's mum, calls me into the exam room, where I am to disrobe, surrounded by framed posters of innocent babies, and my cancerous eggplant.
If you've had or seen an ultrasound, you know that they put some KY jelly on the surface and apply a wand that is vibrating at a very high frequency. If you've had your friend's mum give you an ultrasound right on your member, you know that she also had to grapple with your slippery, walnut-hard, turn-down-the AC sack and kept slapping your manhood out of the way as it flopped around. Finally, I'm like, I'll just hold myself out of the way. Unfortunately, this doctor didn't have any sack experience. Only on babies, she admitted, so she called in the pro, a 30-something ex-frat boy. "Hey, nice member, man," he said, entering the sacred space where parents catch a first glimpse of their soon-to-be progeny. "Now, let's have a look at that sack. Okay, in a situation like this, you want to get your hands warmed up and cup them. You see? Yeah, that's how it's done. Okay, now you want to gently grasp the nut and just kind of work the wand over it like, oh hey dude, look, it's your right nut." He turns the monitor so I can see it. "That is a perfectly healthy testes. It looks flawless. Okay, now you try." Anyhow, they go back and forth squeezing 2 full tubes of KY jelly onto my jewels. It kept making a farty noise when they squeezed it because they were just ham-fisting it, like some subhuman people do with tubes of toothpaste. It took them about 30 minutes of nut wandering to conclude the training session. Finally, they get around to the nut with the actual problem. "Oh yeah, that's it right there. Look at that. Oh yeah, that's definitely a cyst for sure." I'm all thinking, a cyst? Oh my gosh, I didn't read about that. You will not find anything about cysts when searching "what is this lump on my sack," and I thought I was going to die. The doctor is like, "You have a cyst, you can go." And I was like, do I need to do something about this? His reply, "Not unless you want some butthole mucking around with your scrotum for no reason." It was a benign cyst that I still have. Nobody that isn't feeling my testes would know that it was there. Nothing to worry about. In conclusion, not unless you want some butthole mucking around with your testes for no reason. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was in the waiting room of the hospital for a broken toe, I saw a somewhat elderly man, think 50s or 60s, come up to the nurse's desk and cough quietly. She waved him off as a sign to tell him to wait a minute, and he started to pace nervously. He was able to catch a male nurse walking by and try to discreetly tell him he needed immediate medical attention. I was wondering why the guy was so antsy, and that's when I noticed it. The guy had a mixture of brown and red fluid leaking down the back of his thigh from his shorts. The male nurse asked him to speak up, and even though he was quiet, I heard him mutter, "I've got a toy so far up my butt that I can't reach it, and I don't want the entire gosh darn hospital to know about it." The male nurse seemed to hesitate a bit and motioned him to wait in an isolated room. In conclusion, older gentleman has a toy shoved too far up his butt and started leaking onto the floor. And that, kids, is why you always use flared bases. Parents need to teach their kids these things. I had a pay-the-bills type job as an administrator at a private hospital. We had an urgent referral come in for a testicular ultrasound, and the guy whose testes needed to be checked was quite a famous actor and was performing in a play in town, so the schedule for booking him in was really tough going. So I was skipping through the next 2 to 3 days of appointment calendars and looking for a free 10-minute slot or a before-lunch slot that was filled but likely to run short, so there'd be time to speed him in and out. He was on the phone while I was trying to book him in, and I got so self-conscious at the long silence, after explaining the normal waiting times and what I was doing, that I said, all cheery-like, "Don't worry, we'll squeeze your balls in here somewhere." I made sure not to be near the reception desk when he came in. "Okay, I for one would have appreciated your levity and attempt to lighten the mood, Mr. Hospital Administrator. I think this particular actor had no appreciation of comedic timing." So I used to always get pelinodal cysts when I was in high school. From between 13 to 18, I had it 5 times, which according to my doctor is a lot. These things used to hurt bad. I'd get them right above my tailbone and it would feel like the tailbone was broken. If I didn't get it dealt with right away, I wouldn't be able to walk from the pain. The last time I ever got one, it was horrible. It was Halloween and I was at my friend's house when I noticed it starting to hurt. I knew right away what it was. The next morning I had my mum take me to the doctor's office, but because it was a Saturday, my family doctor's office was closed, so we ended up going to a walk-in clinic. The doctor took a quick look at it and said it wasn't the problem and set me up for an x-ray. By the time the x-ray was over, it was hurting beyond anything I could imagine. It felt exactly like one of the cysts, but I trusted the doctor's word. Later that evening, the pain was so severe that I had to go to emergency. At the hospital, the doctor there took another quick look at it and told me it was nothing. He prescribed me some pain medication and sent me on my way. That night was horrible. I was terrified. I thought there was something severely wrong with me. I thought I'd cracked my tailbone after I fell over a balloon at my friend's house or something. On Monday, after a weekend of intense pain, I could finally go to see my family doctor. I remember the waiting room being filled with people. It hurt too much to sit, so I stood in the corner with my back bent weird because it hurt too much to stand up straight. All of a sudden, I felt instant relief, followed by a smell that was quite honestly the worst smell I'd ever smelled in my entire life, even to this day. It smelled like death. The people around me could smell it too. Everyone started coughing, but trying their best not to offend. I could feel my pants were completely wet with the pus from my cyst. When my name was called, I was so embarrassed. Everyone knew the smell was coming from me, and now they could see my drenched clothing. I mean, it was like I'd just dropped the top of my pants and the bottom of my shirt in water. That's how wet they were. The faces of the people were that of utter shock. They must have thought that I'd peed myself. Later in the office, the doctor took one step inside the room and said, "Ah, another cyst?" He knew just from the smell what it was. He took a look and said it was the biggest one he'd ever seen. He signed me up for surgery. Before, I'd just gotten little surgeries just for him to pop the cyst, not a surgeon removing the skin around the area so it would never return. And I've never had one since. On New Year's Eve 2001, I woke up with an unbearable pain in the left side of my abdomen. I couldn't move for over an hour. I was at home from my sophomore year of college, but none of my family was home. After about 3 hours of crying and doubled over in pain, I crawled across the house and called my mum at work. She took me to the ER where they did some various pressure tests and listening and decided it wasn't my appendix, so they did some x-rays. The only other person in the ER was an old lady that had a cut on her head, and she was trying to comfort me while my face was red and I was holding back tears. The doctor came in and looked at the lady and looked at me and whispered, "I don't know how to tell you this, but your colon is full of crap," the actual term he used. I screamed, "That's it? Get it out of me!" And he told me he could give me an enema, a suppository, or a salty drink. I took the drink and crapped for 8 hours straight. I was good enough to go to a party that night, but I still had the runs and didn't get drunk. I felt so much better. In conclusion, thought my appendix was rupturing, and the ER told me I was full of crap. After a rough night of praying to the porcelain goddess, also known as spewing my guts out, I discovered that most of the blood vessels in one eye had burst. The result was red where normally the eye is white, so I looked creepy as heck. The nephew told me I looked like Voldemort. Wife insisted I go to the doctor to get it checked out. So I did. I got a random lady doctor. She took one look at it and asked, "So, are you into any rough stuff in the bedroom?" To which I replied, no, not really." Her response, "Well, you should be careful with that choking stuff. It can be dangerous." I laughed nervously and the nurse kept staring at the floor and I proceeded to explain that I'd been vomiting all night. Even as I left, she said, "Well, just be more careful next time." Oh yes, and the best part, this was in Provo, Utah, 99% Mormon and apparently home of rough, strangling nights of passion. Was getting a physical a few years ago so I could play high school football. Usually the doctor feels around your abdomen and that's that. This time the doctor made me strip and made me cough. I hadn't had fun with myself in a few days, and that with the combination of a stranger's hands on my beans gave me a semi, which I tried to cover, which led to me to accidentally toot on him as I turned around. The doctor looked at me and said, "You can play football," and he just left. I was 10. I went to the ER with a ruptured appendix. They had trouble diagnosing my problem and sent me in for an enema. The doctor was doing his thing. I said, "You must be the least popular doctor in the hospital." "Well, yeah, I don't get many thank you cards, that's for sure." I recently had a sore throat, and when trying to get a good look at it in the mirror, I noticed these large pink spots all over the back of my tongue. I spent a week fretting over it, wondering what they were and why they weren't going away, until my mum got worried enough about them that she went with me to the doctor. Upon examining my throat and tongue, he pronounced that what I was seeing was my taste buds. I've never seen my doctor, who's an incredibly stoic man, smile so wide before. My family is never going to let me live it down. Went to the doctor when I was about 8 months pregnant. At that point in my pregnancy, I was very gassy, and if I tried to hold it in, it would get painful after a while. While I was sitting in the doctor's office, I felt like I had to pass wind.
I held it in for a while, thinking that if I did do that, the doctor would be in at any moment. 15 minutes passed and nothing, so I decided to let it go. The tiniest little toot ever, but it stunk like something crawled up my butt and died. 30 seconds later, the doctor walked in and asked me what that smell was.
That sounds like what happens to me in any given situation where I think I'm alone, and you have mine and presumably many listeners' sympathies. Had nasal polyps removed. When there are a crap ton of them, after the procedure there are several follow-ups to get minor stragglers, but mostly also to remove giant blood clots that have formed. My otolaryngologist is busy digging and scraping and scooping, and some monster fricking aliens are being dragged out. I can see my nostrils expanding like I'm passing a chicken egg-sized baby out of them, and they sloop shut again. Anyway, he's grinding and yanking at this one and it won't come loose. He rotates it a bit, gently places it in a tray and says nothing but leaves the room with a half smile. 3 minutes later he comes back and tells us he had a silent freak out and had to wash up, because a giant bloody string of snot carried elasticity from the pull and slapped up against the length of his cheek like a cheap 25-cent toy from the bins at the front of a Kmart.
Getting my very first pelvic exam. First, the doctor was nervous, so she dropped the speculum, getting it out of the package. Hands shaking and everything. Okay. I'm on the table, speculum inside of me, and doctor and the nurse are hanging around my lady bits. I'm trying to pretend that I'm not here when the doctor goes, are you on your time of the month? No. Why? Oh! In her nervousness, she'd been way too rough and made me bleed. Thanks, doc.
Massive hemorrhoids. Went to the doctor and he had to stuff my butt back inside my butt. Had to lay on my side for 3 days. I was having a lump on my nuts checked. I described said lump to the doctor and he went about trying to locate it himself. I was lying down at this stage, staring at the ceiling. After about a minute of him fumbling, he admitted defeat and asked me to find it. So I sat up and started to jumble them around in my hands. I was hunched over and he wasn't more than a foot away, staring intently at my jewels when suddenly a gust of wind blew the door wide open. Just then a nurse walked past the door. That was awkward eye contact. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.